Hey folks, welcome to the Moon Times Digest on Bounded Liberation, Ancestral Interconnections. For this video, I'm including a segment of a reoccurring reading that I do on IG Live called Woke Red Wednesday at 11:11 a.m. Mountain Time on IG Live on Wednesdays, where we include a reading from an excerpt in a book that is rich with important and timely resources for our times. This week, we read from The Healing Wisdom of Africa by Malidoma, Patrice, very much in line with our topic in this digest. And so I hope that you may listen to this and draw some wisdom and gems and practices for yourself to apply in your connection with your ancestors in whatever way it emerges. There's no right or wrong way, I believe, to do this work. If you find that connection in nature, if you find that connection at an altar, if you find that connection in deep meditation, in moving your body in a way that feels intuitive and liberating, that counts. And there are so many ways in which we may cultivate that connection with our ancestors. And if you'd like to have access to all of our Woke Red Wednesday reads from books like Women Who Run with the Wolves by Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, Sisters of the Yam by Bell Hooks, Sister Outsiders by Audre Lorde, The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. These are the types of books that we're reading, all rooted in spirituality, in women's liberation, in liberation as a collective, on creativity, etc. Support our Patreon. I'll include the link below. We have different tiers of support that you can elect for to become a member from 8 to 48, and you'll have access to all of the readings that we do on a weekly basis, drawing teachings and wisdom from various voices that are timeless and timely. Enjoy the tools and offerings in this digest from various voices that are doing ancestral work within their own lives and also with others. I invite you to call in an ancestor, a person who was once here in the physical form. It could be an animal, a plant, anything that you'd like to call in. To be with us today. And I'll put this candle right here so that it is visible. Coolio. Today we are reading from a really, really rich book, per usual. Of course, every book that we choose for Woke Red Wednesday is super rich and potent with juicy gems. This one is The Healing Wisdom of Africa by Malidoma Patrice, who is an ancestral healer, a workshop facilitator from Burkina Faso, coming from the Dagara tribe. The portion of the book, The Healing Wisdom of Africa, that I chose to read today is around ancestors and nature. Now, if you were tuned in last week, or if you checked out the brief IG Live video on Rage, we read last week from The Women Who Run with the Wolves by Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes on rage and forgiveness. I was sharing a story about leveraging nature, communing with nature as a means of releasing some rageful energy that felt really overwhelming. And the experience of witnessing and feeling nature compost, or at least take on that energy or allow me to release it, such that I was able to digest and process and create thereafter. So if you haven't checked that out, I would recommend going to the IGTV on rage, nature, and quelling because it's very related. And the segment of The Healing Wisdom of Africa that I chose to read today is on ancestors and nature. This is on page 54 if you have this text, this version of it. Also, it was published by Tarcher Putnam in 1998. So, ancestors and nature. When people die, nature is the only hospitable place where their spirits can dwell. Their spirits, living on in the other world, remember clearly the experience of walking on the earth. They remember the moments when they contributed to greater good and helped to make the world better. But they also remember, with great remorse, the failed adventures and the gestures that harmed others and made the world a less dignifying place. The more they see this, the more they ache. And the more they ache, the more eager they are to turn their attention to helping those still in this world. To be active in this world, however, spirits need to enlist our cooperation and help. In order to crack open something in yourself to allow you to be aware of the presence of ancestors' spirits, you have to walk into nature with your emotional self, not with your intellectual self. You need to open up wide your heart so that you can become moist and drink deeply from the emotional echoes that you receive from the frown of a gnarled tree or the twist of a branch. Seen in this way, nature, the dwelling place of the ancestral spirits, is a vast field of grief. I say this because every harmful thing done to the earth is registered in nature. Nature is the place where the real work of healing takes place slowly and gradually. This is because nature cannot ignore the wounds that humans inflict on one another and on her. If nature is the only hospitable place that can hold the spirits that leave the cities and towns, then it is beyond thought what will happen if nature, already so endangered, is destroyed. As part of the healing that we all deserve and all need, the natural world calls us to enter in and allow our grieving self to commune with what already exists there. When there is a grief ritual in my village, it happens in nature, in the open air, not in a church or in some clean, well-lit building. Grieving takes place among the trees, because grief is exactly the sort of thing that the trees will echo and the earth will absorb most naturally. The expression of grief in the presence of nature brings not only healing, but in the end a much stronger connection with nature and the spirits in nature that witness us. Rituals such as grieving are activities that evoke our emotional self. And ritual itself is one of the roads to experiencing the dimensions of nature through the recognition that one carries within oneself an emotional heritage, an emotional gift. Ancestor rituals help to heal the ancestors themselves and our connections to them. Ancestors are those who reside in the spirit world through the loss of their physical bodies. Ancestors are at a disadvantage because they know how to improve things, yet they do not have the body required to act on what they know. We are at a disadvantage because, although we have bodies, we often lack the knowledge required to carry things out properly. This is why spirit likes to work through us. A person with a body is an ideal vehicle for spirit to manifest things in this world. It is important to understand that when we feel that something is missing in our life, when we feel somehow disconnected or displaced, that these feelings are a sign for us to repair our connection with the world of the ancestors and spirits. The reason why this chapter particularly stood out to me is because this is so much of where I feel my connection to ancestral wisdom, to ideas, to concepts, to epiphanies, sometimes in meditation or in nature when I'm not trying to think or do. Certain things will come to me that don't feel like it's from here, but it feels like it's from somewhere else, beyond me, beyond my ego. A lot of times I felt that with trees. Trees have a special connection to me. I just love being with trees. I love being next to trees. I love climbing trees. As abstract as I still feel ancestral work is, because my intellect wants to understand it, My body knows that when I'm with trees, when I'm in trees, that's when I feel the most at peace, the most at home, truly at home. And that's what makes me feel connected to ancestral wisdom. Another thing that helps me really feel in connection with my ancestors is when I'm on all fours. So if I'm crawling or intentionally, I remember when I was living in Colombia, I was in a capoeira class, and in the capoeira class, we spent a lot of time kind of like being on all fours, like being animals. And after that class, I was just so imbued with inspiration and deep gratitude and just calm. And every time I would spend time on all fours, or if I'm dancing and I get on all fours and like walk around like an animal on all fours, that also feels really deeply connecting me to something greater and vaster and powerful, super duper powerful. When we think about ancestral work, it's not just who is in our familial lineage, it's also who is in our lineage of us as beings, as animals ourselves, right? And some people talk about plants being our primary first ancestor, which we all evolved from. We evolved from different animals. We are animals. And so I like to also expand that it's beyond just our, familial lineage, but it's also just as us as humans on this earth, as earthlings, as animals as well. I thought it was really interesting the way Some was talking about how we are at an advantage because we have bodies, right? And I love this perspective too, because when we think about us having the advantage of a body in comparison to our ancestors who don't have that privilege anymore and that advantage, even just the idea of body image for me kind of goes out the window. Like, who gives a fuck what shape I am, or if I'm breaking out, or if my hair is falling out? Like, who gives a fuck? Like, I have a body. I could be here on earth. I could do shit with it. I could manifest. I could tangibilize ideas. Like, that just is so dope. So I think zooming out and remembering that, which requires us to remember that there are ancestors that don't have what we have, is really important and grounding. And then when we realize, okay, yet we also are limited in our concept of what is possible, of our concept on what liberation might look like, or what a world beyond the systems that we live in right now looks like. And that's when we tap into ancestral wisdom, which is also so tied into collective conscious or collective unconscious, which is kind of a vaster web above us that we have access to through nature, through creativity, through prayer, through meditation, these practices that require us to slow down and to listen, to truly listen to something beyond our egos, because our egos stop here, whereas the ancestral wisdom is all around us, everywhere. And that's how we can tap into it, by allowing ourselves to go beyond. Which is why I think Some was talking about being in nature from our emotional self as opposed to our intellectual self, right? Our intellectual self is very much this space, which is very, very powerful, absolutely, though it's not everything. And it's newer in our evolutionary development than our heart space, than our guts. This developed evolutionarily far before our frontal lobe did, which is where analysis and planning and ego even live. Tapping into our emotions, Some talks about in other parts of the book, being a vehicle for action, for understanding deeper wisdom through our emotions. I resonate with that a lot. So much of my emotions inspire my creativity. When I'm able to sit with my emotions as opposed to repress or dismiss or judge them, I'm able to create a lot from them. And in that way, it feels very abundant because we're always feeling things. The feels are infinite, and yet that's almost a superpower. So it is really interesting to think about going into nature with our emotional selves as opposed to our intellectual selves. Eckhart Tolle also talks about this briefly in, I forget whether it's The Power of Now or A New Earth, but he talks about how, when we're in nature, if we're in our intellectual self, we might be like, oh, that's a eucalyptus tree, or oh, that's a maple tree, or oh, that's this. This is a scientific name. I can label and categorize this nicely. Look how much I know about nature, right? Which is great. If we know that, perfect. But also, what is it like to just go there, not knowing what tree it is, not knowing where it comes from, not knowing anything intellectually, and to just be there with our bodies, with our feelings, noticing through our senses what it's like to actually be present there. There's a difference. And that's, in that latter way of being, is where we get to learn more, where we can be from a place of curiosity as opposed to intellectual knowing, which is something our culture is addicted to, knowing the answers, knowing everything. But there's a lot that we don't know. And when we realize that, that's when we're able to tap into the greater wisdom that goes beyond what our minds could even conceptualize. I have to remember this a lot because, you know, when I go into my garden space, and I was talking to Uthimia, my sister friend, about this, I want to be like, ooh, what am I going to do next here? What am I going to plant next? What's going to happen here? Like, ooh, when am I going to paint that? And there's like a lot of doing that I want to do. And sometimes I just need to go there and chill on the grass and just observe and just listen. There's a difference there. And that's one abstract but still very tangible way to tap into ancestral wisdom. Ritual is a really important part of, you know, this entire book. Some has a whole section on different elemental rituals with fire, with water, for grief, etc., reconciliation, libation, etc. It's really, really beautiful, actually, for anyone who facilitates ritual, who facilitates spaces for different releasing or communion. This is a powerful text to learn from, certainly not to appropriate from. There is a difference, right? Reading something and using it, as opposed to reading something, learning from it, digesting it, perhaps seeing how it may authentically come through you based on your own background. But it could be a really important reference text for that. Maybe consider spending some time in nature and thinking about your ancestors and whatever ancestors you want to call in. You may know who you want to call in, you may not know, but we all have ancestors. We all have different ancestors and very much the same ancestors if we go really deep into our history. So what would it be like to spend some time in nature, calling in the ancestors? I'll certainly be doing that myself. Ciao.